So, two pieces of news. At the start of this episode, I want to share two news items with you. The first news, after the Russian shelling of Kyiv, search operations continued all night without interruption in the Slomiansky district. And as of now, 20 people have died there. The work is ongoing, but in total, 25 people have died in the capital and nearly 150 people have been injured. Unfortunately, there was no miracle. I remember I mentioned that the parents were waiting near that building for their son to be found. And you've probably seen all that footage. Later, there was incorrect information that he was alive and in the hospital. In reality, no. Unfortunately, that information turned out to be incorrect, and they found his body. Sadly, he died. This guy right here. And this morning I saw a post from an acquaintance of mine. You remember we were raising money for Uncle Sasha for the rap. His niece Nina and her friend Vlada were collecting the money. So Vlada wrote that he was her longtime school friend and that it was his parents who were waiting for him. And unfortunately, that miracle did not happen. And the second piece of news, the US does not agree with the harsh wording regarding Russia's actions in Ukraine and wants to soften it. Therefore, a joint statement from the G7 on Ukraine is naturally not expected, according to Reuters. And the State Department has responded to that very shelling. We are aware of the attack on Kyiv. There are numerous casualties, including the tragic death of a US citizen. We condemn these strikes. That's all. But also the embassy. The American embassy in Ukraine also responded almost a day and a half later. Today, together with all of Ukraine, we join in the day of mourning in Kyiv for the victims of the Russian attack on June 17th. You see, they did call it a Russian attack, after all. We express our deepest condolences. This senseless assault contradicts President Trump's call to stop the killing and end the war. President Trump's call. Well, calling on deranged dictators is a hopeless cause, and Trump knows that perfectly well. Naturally, Trump was mentioned. So this information from the embassy was published on the social network X. And just so you know, in the comments, of course, everyone expressed their opinions about Trump's policy towards Russia, ranging from the simplest and most logical comments like, you can do much more. You, the US, can do much more, with a single stroke of the pen, to direct accusations of complicity, saying that this strike was truly the result of the White House's spineless policy. Meanwhile, the Trump family has announced the launch of their own smartphone with a gold case under the brand Tone Phone and the creation of the Trump mobile carrier. Everyone talks about their own thing, but Donald always talks about gold. Golden statues, golden towers, a gold card. It doesn't matter who buys it as long as you have 5 million. That's it. You're a success. A gold smartphone. Well, basically, yes. And now let's move on to White House politics. Kellogg is planning to visit Belarus soon to meet with Alexander Lukashenko. To be honest, at first I didn't believe it. At first I thought that maybe it would be about the Zapad 2025's exercises where Russia and Belarus will be conducting joint military drills together so that they don't cause any trouble there. But no, Kellogg himself says in conversations that this is a chance to restart the negotiation process. So the special envoy sees this trip as an opportunity to initiate peace talks. Well, for Lukashenko, this is a real celebration, I have to say. In the past few years, this will be not probably, but definitely the highest ranking visit. I think only Pompeo visited once before. So even the expired Draniki couldn't have imagined something like this. Maybe, on such an occasion, he'll even release a couple of political prisoners out of the thousands he has locked up in his dungeons. Why isn't it simple and won't change anything? It will make the situation worse. At the very least, for Ukraine and for the entire civilized world. First of all, it's legitimizing a dictator. Obviously, he'll want some kind of partial lifting of sanctions or something else. Why even talk to someone who in principle has no influence on the process? Putin is just a transmitter of moods. So if Trump has such great relations with Putin, as he claims, he can call him up and talk at any time. Or maybe the point is that Trump is no longer able to get anything done with Putin, and so they decided to pull a dusty old tuber out of the chest and try playing a little differently. to, as they say, come in through the back door. So maybe they should go negotiate with Kadyrov as well. Why stop at the small stuff? They could just go on a whole tour of the most unhinged figures. And I think Trump will use any means, even the most shameful and ineffective ones, just to create some imitation of a process, and above all, to avoid, God forbid, imposing sanctions against Russia. In general, the policy of appeasement, placation, and legitimization of dictators leads to only one outcome. They will simply become completely brazen, lose not just their fear, but even the last remnants of any concerns, stockpile weapons, and at some point will just try to seize half the world. That's it. And then impose their own rules on the territories they've captured. That's it. And what are you going to do to us now? Go to Lukashenko, go ahead and start your negotiation processes. But while fans of golden statues of themselves and golden phones pursue a policy of appeasement, real warriors are pursuing a policy of kill peace. And let me remind you, we have a very important fundraiser for the unmanned aerial complex Vampire, commonly known as Baba Yaga. It's a huge hexacopter that at night drops a massive amount of blessed fire onto the heads of the swamp fiends. We're raising funds for the 100 and Honest Brigade who are currently defending Chasiv Yar. This is one of the hottest spots on the front. And with this Vampire, believe me, our soldiers will be able to wipe out the swamp fiends much faster. That's why I'm really asking you to support this fundraiser. Yesterday we made good progress. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video and also in the comments. There you'll also find the fundraiser card number and the PayPal account for those who want to help from abroad. As usual ways, from the bottom of my heart, I say thank you to you, both from myself and from our soldiers, whom you have already helped so much. If you're not watching on my channel, here's a QR code. It leads directly to the fundraising page. And now the question about Donald Trump, which is asked most often, at least in my comments. How did it happen that he became president of the United States? In fact, there is a very logical explanation for all of this. And it's not just about Donald Trump, because honestly, there are some truly wild moments, right? That is making deals with murderers, trading with anyone at all, it doesn't matter, as long as there's money involved. How many people someone has killed or destroyed in their own country or another country makes absolutely no difference. Lack of principles, lying, complete inability to take responsibility for one's words. These random promises and their systematic failure to deliver on them. I mean, there's a lot more to it as well. A fifth grader's vocabulary. So just imagine when Trump says, I'll come in and end the war in 24 hours. And we understand that he does have leverage. Well, maybe not in 24 hours, but he does have the means to force Putin to the negotiating table in a week or two, to cut him off from money, to destroy his economy, has leverage. And when he says this, millions of people in Ukraine think, really, well, there's hope. You know, when a country has been at war for several years and the president of the number one country says, I will end it, people start to feel hope that finally children will live without bombs, will be able to go to school normally. And then, well, if not 24 hours, let's say 100 days, well, 100 days now I could just get up from the table and leave altogether. In other words, to play with people's lives and hopes like that is inexcusable. So in reality, intelligence gets in the way of power. This has already been proven. If you have a high IQ, your mind starts to work against effective leadership in its classical sense. Your speeches become nuanced, your answers somewhat cautious. Never in their entire life would a truly reasonable person with genuine empathy just simply pull a number out of thin air and say when the war will end. No, to hell with all of that, absolutely not at all. They would never do that. But the masses, the majority, aren't waiting for some kind of analysis. Listen, there are nuances here. It can be done in 24 hours. They're waiting for confidence. No reflection, just, I'll do it. That's it. Let's go. So, where a smart person sees complexity, a not so smart person will talk about a straight line. The smart person knows that every decision is a chain of consequences, a context. But the crowd hears when you say, listen, it's not all so clear. Cut here. Let's figure it out. The crowd hears, all right, we need to wait, to calculate. And next to him stands another politician who says, we'll do it quickly and simply. It's all super easy. Why are you even listening to him? We'll get it all done fast. And guess whose words get a response? The winner isn't the one who knows more, but the one who's better at pretending he'll get it done. That's why, especially power, this very kind of power television-based charismatic demands speed and simplicity. Society doesn't really need actual confidence, just the illusion of confidence. That's it. And that's how this trap of overconfidence appears. The incompetent person, if they're confident, sounds much more convincing. But someone who is reasonable and cautious has no place in politics at all. In other words, people think, oh, he seems unsure, he's hesitating. Give us a quick solution right away. Politics itself, in principle, is corrupt. So to move forward in it, you have to develop corrupt qualities within yourself. Or at the very least, you need to have been born with them. So as a result, people like Trump end up at the very top, basically trumps. And then what we see starts to happen. By the way, we've already mentioned more than once that there is an abnormal number of psychopaths and narcissists in power because they possess qualities that are extremely necessary for politics. And so I found an interesting study on this topic. Here are some approximate statistics on psychopaths and narcissists in positions of power. Of course, not everyone in society has been diagnosed, but it is generally believed that psychopaths with classic traits make up about 1 to 2% of the general population. Among politicians, that number is between 10 and 12%. You see, that's 10 times higher. Narcissists make up about 5%. In politics, they account for 20 to 25%. These figures are based on the work of Kevin Dutton and Robert Hare. And, well, they take quite a fundamental approach to this. Why is it that for psychopaths and narcissists, power is like a flower to a bee? Well, because politics requires tough decisions, a certain ethical flexibility, and the ability to step over others. Yes, that's politics. It creates psychopaths, forgive me, are devoid of guilt, hesitation, and empathy, which are things that prevent ordinary people from making radical decisions. And in politics, these qualities are very much needed. And emotional pretense is simply their profession. That is, psychopaths and narcissists know how to simulate charisma, confidence, and compassion without actually feeling any of them. So for a politician, it's enough for them to appear a certain way. Appearance is enough. And in this, psychopaths and narcissists are especially strong. And narcissists in particular sell themselves to the masses extremely well. Voters don't read biographies, they perceive the image with their eyes and ears. Someone who is confident and charismatic is simply the perfect candidate. It doesn't matter what they actually say. And of course, narcissists are always in the spotlight. They absolutely love this narrative. I will save the world. I will save the world. You rarely ever feel the urge to publicly declare that only you can save the world without even knowing how. But they think, me, I'll come and immediately save the world. You've probably seen people like that, right? And as for psychopaths, they always display a very low amygdala reactivity. In other words, they have no anxiety or very little fear. Stress, this makes them very resilient to various media scandals, media attacks, and criticism. That's why I once spoke with a deputy who ended up, well, he didn't go through these filters. As you know, during the elections, when the current deputies were chosen, many people came in who had never been involved in politics before, and then suddenly found themselves in politics. They didn't go through these classic political filters. I was talking to one deputy, and he's actually quite Sharpon of the few who, well, found his place. I won't mention his name so as not to advertise anyone. He told me then, listen, I had no idea it could be like this, that people could write all sorts of nasty things about you, make things up, and lie. I said, welcome to politics. If you were a psychopath, none of this would bother you at all. But as it is, here you go sign for it, as they say. Basically, politics isn't just about power. It's just a mindless game of survival. There's really nothing beautiful about it. In fact, it's not the kindest or the smartest who, by the way, that's one of my mistakes as well, will look at it and think, Donald Trump, you're the president. You should be setting an example. You should be kind, intelligent. You should be, I don't know, compassionate. But no, politics is such a dirty business that, on the contrary, the kind and intelligent person will be thrown out at the very first turn. Here, you have to lie, play a role without blinking, just spout nonsense left and right, attack without remorse, stab people in the back. And then, naturally, all questions disappear. By the way, I've worked with various politicians for a long time, and I can confirm this for you. There's just an abnormal number of both psychopaths and narcissists. Because a normal, empathetic person, you're out of there in a flash, right at the very first political turn. If you can't lie out, you go. If you can't destroy competitors, friends, pretend to be a friend. Act like a friend, out you go. If you can turn a blind eye to people suffering for political gain, out you go. That's how it is. That's just how it is, unfortunately. And that's exactly why psychopaths and narcissists in politics aren't an anomaly, but rather a logical product of the system. In other words, they're the ones who create this system, create a demand for anti-traits. For these dark traits, they give you a competitive advantage in politics. By the way, friends, subscribe to this channel so you can know the truth and so more people can know the truth too. By the way, there are studies about which professions have the highest number of narcissists and psychopaths aside from politics. Well, it all makes perfect sense. CEOs, chief executives in some industries, up to 20%. Lawyers, prosecutors, no surprise, they're 12%. Media personalities, celebrities, TV hosts, again, no surprise, up to 15%. There's a need for attention, publicity, and control over their image, so it all makes sense. Surgeons and doctors also up to 10%, especially among surgeons. Obviously, with those kinds of operations, there's control, power over life and death, so certain qualities are needed there as well. That's why a psychopath can actually be a kind of universal soldier for certain types of work. Law enforcement, special force, especially there, well, generally, yes. I also found it interesting that there's a fairly high percentage among cult leaders, gurus, and coaches. That's a new trend. They have absolute control, manipulation of individuals, a cult of personality, adoration, and so on. That's how it is. So, yes. By the way, there's an interesting book on this topic. I recently came across one called Snakes in Suits. It's a study of how psychopaths behave not in prisons, but in the corporate environment. And I think many of you have stories about an employee, male or female, who joined the company and after some time, suddenly everyone started arguing and the company split into different groups. Then when the atmosphere in the company became toxic, this employee, male or female, usually leaves, often amid a scandal, leaving behind scorched earth, a department or sector of the company at each other's throats, pardon my French. And on top of that, this employee, male or female, gets some astronomical bonuses just so they would leave, and that's it, without any scandal. So yes, such people do exist, and you know, they have a very interesting quality. They really know how to make people like them, to figure out what others want. Why don't HRs catch them? Because they know how to give the right answer to the right question, charm, make people fall for them, and so on. That's a really, really interesting thing. So as I was saying, if you behave like that, if you put your own personal gain above everything else, prioritizing yourself, and just don't care about anyone else or the consequences. By the way, in my opinion, that's a perfect example of an employee who came in and wrecked the global security system, set everyone against each other, and then will leave, and the entire civilized world will have to patch up the holes after them. Guess who I'm talking about? So, as I was saying, these threats, which by 2030 and I think even sooner will become universal, because right now people are just turning a blind eye to how dictators are growing stronger, forming a club, how attempts are made to appease them, how they freely send troops and weapons to each other, help each other in wars, in short, completely disregarding any kind of containment policy, which is being actively dismantled by Donald. Let's not mention the last name, with his own hands. So here's another threat. Today I came across a piece by the representative of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense, Andriy Cherniak, about how the Kremlin is expanding its military presence in the Arctic, preparing a foothold for resource expansion. It's a good piece, everything's laid out clearly, that against the backdrop of global warming, new strategic opportunities in Africa in particular, there are mineral deposits there, and the Northern Sea route, the ice is melting, and by the way, the Arctic is melting much faster than expected. That's why the Northern Sea route and the Kremlin are quickly becoming more active there. They already have 17 military bases there. Well, not exactly military, but in the Arctic, they're trying to establish a foothold. But the main adversary there won't be the Kremlin. I'll talk about that a bit later. So their key tool for implementing this is their Arctic and Antarctic Research Institute. They collect data, their geological surveys, and so on and so forth. In reality, they are gathering data, including for military expansion and developing the region's infrastructure, communication equipment, satellite communication systems. And as you can imagine, these systems will be used. Russia hardly ever uses anything for peaceful purposes. In other words, they'll always have money for war, for developing and producing weapons, but definitely not for the social sector. Why? fight, fight, fight. They're total lunatics, you know? Lunatics. By the way, the topic of the Arctic is really interesting. I've only recently started studying it. There's so much information there that you could make an entire series of separate programs about it. In general, this is one of the central geostrategic trends. I'm talking about the development of the Arctic, where the interests of Russia, the US, China, and NATO countries collide. The Kremlin is simply betting on the Arctic. However, there's a completely different player standing behind the Kremlin. Well, the Arctic is attractive from every angle. That is, by 2030, due to melting ice, as many as 3 shipping routes may open up there. One of them will be a direct route about 1.5 times faster and shorter than going through Suez and Panama, namely the Northern Sea route. And this will certainly help to speed up transportation between Europe and Asia. And just imagine, as you can imagine, if all of a sudden, after all, Trump didn't say it for nothing, well, give it up, remove China, give us Greenland, the Panama Canal, bring it all here. I want to take it. I want it. I want it. I want it. Here, people act more cunningly. And besides, Trump will leave, someone else will come, and they might not want to take anything at all. But here, they act together, both Putin and that very player, I'm talking about Xi Jinping, about China, they act in concert. Moreover, for Xi Jinping, Putin, in this case, serves as a locomotive. Actually, not a locomotive. In this case, more like an icebreaker. That comparison works better here. He's paving the way for him, and then, Xi will give him a kick with his Chinese boot under his buttocks behind and say, goodbye, I'm in charge here now. In 2018, China said that they are also close to the Arctic, so they will be pursuing their own interests there as well. And they're up to 30% of the world's undiscovered gas reserves, 15% of the world's oil reserves. And as for rare earths, copper, nickel, and everything else. Well, in short, Russia is already claiming more than 1 million square kilometers of the Arctic shelf. They're already bombarding the UN with applications, the Organization of Concerned Nations. So basically, they've already set up their military bases there under the pretext of geological exploration, some kind of sampling, and other such things. They're analyzing possible landing points, navigation routes, and troop deployments. In short, soon you'll have a new problem on your hands. So I took a look at who has how many bases up there. In fact, Russia will soon be ahead of everyone else, naturally with the support of China. And now they're planning to create an Arctic version similar to China's One Belt, One Road, their own route through the Arctic, and the development of an icebreaker fleet, also with China's help. So expect problems. Very soon you'll have another major problem on your hands. If the policy of appeasement continues, but if all good people come together and just beat down this field, simply crush and kick it, bury it under sanctions, and make sure it never crawls out from under the baseboard, and if it does, keep kicking it now. That would be the right thing to do. Goodness must come with feasts.